the two main things. Well, the one big thing is just finish projects, even if they're little. Don't worry about failing because you're going to. Everybody does. Just keep pushing forward and uh, just finish it. Don't fall into the trap of trying to make everything perfect. Study your craft. Try to get better at each component, and on top of that, just build your audience. And it's a slow process, and so it's like this. It feels like it's taking forever. That's normal.
Hello, my name is Annie, and you are listening to Worlds of Webcomics, a podcast in which I interview creative people who are making comics for online readers. Today's guest is a fellow YouTuber and someone who has worked in the professional industry as well as making webcomics. And so I think that you will enjoy all of the insight that he has to give. So without further ado, let's go to the interview. All right, for those who might not know, could you introduce yourself and what you're known for?
I am Brian Shearer. I am known for G.I. Joe, Transformer comic books from IDW, as well as my own books, William the Last and Gunship Thunderpunch, along with just a bunch of nonsense sketches and things on other parts of the internet.
Yes, awesome. Could you give us kind of like a quick pitch for your two main comics?
Yeah, so William the Last is an all ages fantasy story about a young boy who grows up on an island with his grandfather. And when his grandfather dies, he climbs to the top of this mountain and finds himself in a kingdom where the people are in hiding and a tyrant rules, and William's name has been forbidden from being spoken. And so that's kind of where that story gets going, and just kind of follows his adventures trying to figure out what's going on and where he fits in. And as far as Gunship Thunderpunch, that is the story about a woman whose son is kidnapped by Martians. And to get him back, she enlists the help of one of her patients. She's a doctor who is in prison for stealing a gunship. And so they go to use the gunship. What she doesn't know is the gunship is a giant, sentient, transforming robot that has been left abandoned in a junkyard for 30 years and isn't too happy about it. So they all get their crew and go off to save her son. And that first part of that trilogy was on Indiegogo and is being shipped now, slowly, one book at a time, by me.
Yes, that's so exciting. That was about a year ago now that it got funded, right?
Yeah. So it got funded last summer. I finished it up. I'm doing shipping now, and then as soon as that's done, book two will go up. My goal for book two is just get the thing out faster. So I got to trying to speed up things.
How many books do you intend for it to be?
Well, the initial story will be it's a three-part series. After that, I'm going to leave it open to where I could do further stories if people are really into it. So, but this first thing, what I'll do is I'll do these first three, and then I'll probably do a collected edition of all three, the whole story together in an omnibus, and then move forward from there. So, I've got a good 2 years worth of stuff at least to keep me busy.
Very cool. Well, I definitely want to pick your brain a little bit more about what it's like to run a Kickstarter campaign.
Sure.
But before we get into that, I'd love a little bit of backstory on you. Like, how did you get into the industry, and have you always been into art?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was one of those kids that was drawing all the time and getting in trouble at school and whatnot. So I mean, I was always kind of naturally gravitated towards art, and but it wasn't until I was in college, maybe early 20s, where I decided that I really wanted to try to do it for a living. Since every job I had, I would just sit around doodling whenever I could. So I was like, maybe it'd be a good idea to actually make this my job. So I started buckling down and trying to learn anatomy instead of just drawing a lot, actually taking the intentional efforts to learn to draw right or better. And so I always felt like, I always say I feel like I'm about 10 years behind where I should be. But so I was working at an audiovisual company, and I was trying to break into comics. I did an indie book with a friend of mine, and kind of flopped. Back then, it wasn't. This was early 2000s. There really wasn't. The internet wasn't quite what it is now. There was no crowdfunding or anything, so you had to go through Diamond and all that. It was very expensive to make a comic back then. And so I started around 2007. I actually started doing some sketch cards for companies like Upper Deck that would had the Marvel license, and gosh, I did thousands of those things. But there is a group of guys here locally that had a studio, and they were working since the 90s at Marvel in DC, and I got to know them at local conventions, and they kept asking me to come and hang out with them in the studio, and eventually I did and started renting space and joined the studio. And that was really for about 5 years, I tell people that was kind of my comic book college, because I could see pages floating around the studio of Spider-Man or whatever, and I really learned to ink. There was a lot of inkers there, and I learned to ink. And slowly, I would help them out when they were behind, and then if they couldn't finish a job, what happened was there was one guy was doing a Doctor Who thing, and he couldn't finish it, so I was inking him, and then I stepped in to pencil him. And so that was my first real job at IDW back in, gosh, I think that was like 2010 or something like that. And so I went full time around 2010 or 11, and then I got into, because I was had my foot kind of in the door at IDW. They knew who I was. I started working on GI Joe, and I was on there for 6 years, and then Transformer stuff at the same time. And so that's kind of it took a long time from the time I first showed anything to an editor and tried to get work till I actually got comic book work was about 8 or 9 years. So I definitely took the slow road.
Well, we're very glad that you're here now.
Well, I am too.
So it's interesting because a lot of people that I've talked to are just now getting their start through webcomics, and you're
Hmm.
kind of doing the opposite, where you've actually worked professionally in the industry and then started posting William the Last on Webtoon.
Yeah.
So what was the motivation for you behind wanting to post that and make it free and accessible?
Well, it's always been hard to. I think people take it for granted now, especially on Webtoon. If you have a decent comic on Webtoon, you can get an audience so much faster than ever before. And when I know the 2000s and when the internet started, you had your own website, you put your comic up, and you tried to get people to go there. There was no central hub or hubs where audiences just kind of already went, for the most part. And those things started to develop. But when I was doing William the Last, my goal with it was kind of a pet project. I just wanted to, I basically started the comic at a slow convention just for me, and then I quietly put it out on my own website at William the Last. And then when I put it up on a Webtoon, it started getting some traction. It was basically just to build up, a bigger audience and to reach more people, and more people will read your comic. And this is, I don't know, maybe it's kind of sad. I mean, it's an opportunity, but it's also sad. But because William Last is also published by Antarctic Press, so it's out in stores. Way more people have seen it on Webtoon than have seen it on, in the stores. Because I think I'm up to 23,000 subscribers. I've got 1 million views over there. And comics in general, typically, especially for an indie comic, it just doesn't happen, especially not these days. So that's one of the reasons. The main reason. You're constantly trying to get out where people are and build up an audience any way you can. And so that's kind of my rationale for it.
Definitely. So how did that happen with it being published by Antarctic Press while you were making it available?
Well, they actually don't really mind that because, and it's kind of counterintuitive, because a lot of people think, well, if I put it out for free, nobody will buy it, which is completely not true. If people love the thing online and you offer it a different way, like in print, they will completely come on board. So Antarctic Press had no problem with it. They kind of saw it as more promotion for it. So I had known someone that was involved with them, and Guardian Knight Studios. They both of them are kind of in conjunction publishing it. I'm not exactly sure what their agreement is, but I knew someone with Guardian Knight, and I was just like, this was just before I really got into crowdfunding too, and I was like, well, I'll just see if they want to publish it, and they took it. So I was like, oh, okay. So all of a sudden it was in stores, and I was doing a monthly book, putting it out every month, and the COVID-19 has disrupted that a bit. It's I don't even know when it's scheduled to be back out. I haven't talked to them, but it has been going up on Webtoon fairly regularly. I'm trying to get once or twice a month, have a batch of stuff up there. But again, it's one of those things where you're especially with Gunship Thunderpunch and trying to do all the hats of fulfilling and all that stuff. You're constantly trying to budget time, so you can't just sit there and do updates every day on it.
Right. And something that I found helpful was not only your videos on webcomics and getting accustomed to Webtoon, but also seeing how you've changed the formatting over posting
Yeah.
William the Last as well. Do you have
Yeah.
any thoughts on the idea of vertical scrolling?
Well, again, it's, every um, the web is a different medium, and people are so used to especially in Webtoon, their readers over there are accustomed to scrolling because they're on their tablets and phones mostly, and it's kind of fascinating because it does affect kind of a pacing. I mean, you can do things like, there's dead space in between something happening and the next, so it changes up the way the reader kind of perceives the pacing of the story. The biggest thing was when I started posting it, I posted for probably several years. I would just throw a page up, like I didn't format it in the Webtoon format, and I got up to, like, it did really well despite that. But when I switched up to the scrolling thing, the numbers started going up, and almost immediately Webtoon, it became a staff pick, and they actually pushed it a couple different ways. They're not going to do that if you're not in their format, because your webcomic being in the Webtoon format is really important to Webtoon. So
Mm.
if you're going to do well there, you got to play by they'll let you put a page up, but they're not really going to, give you any extra boost if you're not playing by the format rules. The other thing too is, and it's people on Webtoon really want a long scroll. They want to feel like they've spent a lot of time scrolling through. And I have noticed that if you can pace it to where people feel like, even if you haven't put a lot of content, but they feel like they've scrolled enough, they'll be satisfied. It is a very weird kind of psychological interaction thing going on with the material, but it's just a different medium, and really it doesn't take that much time. I've gotten kind of used to very quickly taking the panels and spacing them out, so it's not as big a hassle as some traditional comic book format artists think it's going to be. But again, if you want to build up the audience, you got to play the game.
Right. And speaking of which, it's funny because I feel like there's a lot of pressure on artists now to have like a quote unquote online presence. Can you speak to that, or what do you feel like has been helpful in like building your audience?
Yeah, I mean, it really is important. I mean, it used to be when I was trying to break in, and this has been this way until maybe the last 10 years, really Twitter and Instagram and social media really kind of maturing change things. But it used to be you would go to the convention, or you would mail off your samples to an editor, and you would just you'd keep doing that until you got work here and there. And then I saw editors would begin to hire, well, if you have a lot of Twitter followers, if you're popular, and the thinking was, we're going to bring your people you've already attached, who are attached to you, into our book. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But really now, especially, things are uncertain in the comic book industry. It was basically on hold for however many months and all that. And there's really, especially with crowdfunding here, especially in the last couple of years, coming into its own, there's never been a better time to build up your own audience. It's not easy, but you have access to all these platforms where people have gathered. It's super, well, it's not super cheap, but it's way cheaper than it used to be to print a book. With crowdfunding, there's no reason why you can't build up your audience, and then people basically pre-order it and you make it. So it really, there's a big opportunity to be a little more self-sufficient rather than the old model of, hey, I'm knocking on the editor's door, please give me work, I have to feed my family. You can be a little more proactive and actually get your work, and you decide. And especially when you start getting into crowdfunding, you basically assign yourself work. What do I want to do, rather than just doing whatever gets handed to you.
Right. And let's talk about the crowdfunding because I think a congratulation is in order. It's over 10,000 of its goal, pretty much, right?
Oh, it was. See, the goal was. I think the goal. I think I had it set at 8,000, and it was ended at 44. I think.
Oh, 8,000 was the original goal?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, so that's way more than I thought.
Well,
That
I
sounds
figured
fun.
it was one of those things where yeah, it was kind of a gamble, because if it hit 8,000, I know, and it would didn't go any further. I was like, well, I could make those few books for that much and get them printed. And then, of course, I don't know if that would have worked out or not, but Yeah, it got funded pretty quick, and it did better than I thought it would. So hope we'll see. I keep telling everybody if the second book does as well or better, then I'm onto something, and it wasn't a fluke. But everybody seems to be liking the books that's getting them so far. I'm almost done with. I'm over halfway done with Fulfilling. So people are for the last couple of weeks have been posting reviews, and everybody really seems to like it, and they're on board so far with. No, I haven't had anybody say this was horrible. I'm not doing the next one. So hopefully it works out.
How does it feel to have it be in people's hands now?
It's good. It is nice when you put something out there and people like it. So there's that little I'm going to ship this, and then when the reviews first start coming in, you're like you just see the name, and you're like, okay, is this because I was my editor and my friend Elliot, who I let him read it before, and both of them I was like, does this suck? Is this okay? Because I've been staring at it for like a year and I can't tell anymore. And they were all reassuring and whatnot, but yeah, when the reviews start coming in and everybody seems to be having a good time, they're like, okay, I think I pulled it off.
Yeah, sometimes it can feel like having your nose pressed to like a pointillism painting. You just got to
Yeah,
step back.
yeah. It's like I don't know if it's good anymore because I've been staring at it for too long.
Well, I think it is good, especially based on, everybody's response. So again, I think that's amazing that it was a success. Um, for those who might be interested in pursuing the same, what do you feel was helpful in making it a success? And would you do anything differently now?
Well, as far as making a success, talking it up. I mean, I think we talked it up on different shows and YouTube things, and I was talking it up on Twitter and showing art for, gosh, maybe 3 to 4 months or more before then. So kind of and of course, I had built up an audience by that point too. So, I last year about this time at Heroes Con, the campaign was like in full swing, and I think I was at like 20,000, and I was at Heroes Con, and I had people coming up to me, congratulating me. It's different artist friends and things, and several people during that process were talking about they had active campaigns at the same time, and they weren't doing well. And I said, well, okay, well, what did you do to, are you on YouTube or Twitter? Are you promoting it? No, not really. Like, well, I can't. It's the you can't just throw it up there and expect people to come. It's like you got to hustle, do the groundwork of promoting. Hopefully yourself, because I also have friends that are not really. They post stuff here and there on Twitter, and they're not on YouTube. They're not on Instagram of all places, the most visual social
Right.
media thing. And artists aren't. If you're not on there, I don't understand that. But so again, it's for some reason, and maybe it's because of the whole disconnect between the traditional way of I make my sample pages and I go to the editor to the current way that's I need to build my own audience is really important. So you have to put up the groundwork to build up your audience and be positive, and you have to talk about it, and you have to be excited about the project. And then the biggest thing during those 30 to 60 days that you're running the campaign, you are going to feel like you are annoying everyone. You're not, but the thing is, it's like you post things, and not everybody that follows you wherever sees everything you post. You have to post things 3 and 4 and 7 times before people will see it and act on it. So those two things, you got to be really proactive in talking about it and building up interest and all that. So it's exhausting. It's mentally exhausting, and then but there's really no way around it. You got to put on that marketing hat and do all the stuff you can do. So
Yeah, across all of the social media platforms, which do you feel has been the most helpful in translating to like funding your projects?
Twitter and YouTube for me.
Mm.
Some people it's Instagram. Facebook is hit or miss. I know some people have done some ad stuff on Facebook and done really well. I have found that ads on Twitter don't work. At least they never did for me. So every artist kind of has place where they've kind of connected with people, and whatever place you're connecting with people, keep double down on it. And you can see where in Instagram, it'll tell Instagram, in Indiegogo, it'll tell you where people are coming from, and where funding sources and people who came from here and then clicked the fund thing, whatever. So you can kind of keep track of that. But yeah, for me, I noticed a lot of YouTube because I'm on YouTube a lot and I talk about it, and then a lot of Twitter. So not so much on Facebook very much, but again, it's and things are always changing. Like algorithms are changing and platforms are changing, so you just have to be aware of where you're interacting with people.
Yeah. Speaking of your YouTube, not that numbers are everything, but it looks like you've made over 600 videos and you have over 8,000 subscribers. So I think that's another point of pride for sure.
Well, yeah, I'm like 600 videos. I should have more subscribers. No, but yeah, I just crossed 8,000 some the other day actually, and I'm already at 8,100. So I'm hoping like I'm getting some traction towards 10,000. So I just I try to be consistent. I'm trying to do things like the videos I upload are typically try to be tutorial and tip things and just what I've learned as I go. And then every day, usually around 10 o'clock in the morning, I'll do a live stream where I'm just drawing or doodling or working on something. And I try to maintain that 10 o'clock morning show just so people know where I am when I am. And then I'll do ridiculous things like my friend Elliot and I do Paranormals, which is a paranormal parody news show. So it's kind of like I'm just trying to do these little around art and tutorials, some light entertainment, just to just for fun, just to amuse myself mostly.
No, I like that. It's you're being active and you're providing variety around a specific topic at the same time. With the live streams, which I'm glad you brought up, was that difficult when you first started, or because like for me, I'm if somebody's behind me while I'm drawing, I get all nervous, and so
Yeah, yeah. So when I started the channel, I mean, I think I started the initially I was just doing a vlog like every day, and I was just trying to basically uh, low expectations document. This is what I'm working on, blah blah blah. But I remember when I started, I had a little false starts here and there where I would look in the camera and try to talk, and it was just awkward. And it's like, and I would just delete the video. And then I got to the point where it's like, what? I don't care. I'm just gonna. If this bombs, it'll just bomb. And once I got to that point, it was loose enough to where it was kind of normal. And then I got more comfortable. And like I started recording goofy little intros that had nothing to do with anything. They're just to kind of make myself laugh. And then with live streaming, initially it is. I think there's a learning curve. I don't know. It's been a while, but maybe it took me a month or two. But you get to the point where it's just you're talking and regulars show up in the chat and you're just talking to people that you've talked to a lot. And then over time, what happens is there are a bunch of inside jokes and little storylines that come up, and so it gets more and more comfortable. It is really uncomfortable that at the very beginning, just trying to find your voice really. How am I approaching this? And I found the best way to approach it just matter of fact, just talk about what I'm doing. I there are times like the other day, I redraw a hand 15 times in public. That's like, oh well, it happens. I don't care. So, and I think people relate to that a little bit better than oh look, everything I do is wonderful and it just falls out of the pen. Nah, not so much.
that's true. I mean, that makes sense. So let's talk about William the Last a little bit more. For the writing aspect, is the whole thing written out, and how much longer is the story going to be?
Um, it is. I know where it's going. It's not scripted all out. I kind of write that kind of plot style, and I am about for the Antarctic Press run, for example. I think I have two issues left to kind of wrap up that storyline. Um, I, I want to get. I'm not exactly sure, honestly, how far I am. I'm pretty close to getting to a point of resolution. Maybe not for the entire tale, but for like volume one, the first story. I'm trying to get to that point so I can do eventually a big collected work of that for a crowdfunded thing. So um, again, it's one of those kind of stories where I'm just kind of looking forward and very informally telling it, and it's like a playground. So that's actually been kind of difficult, honestly, for when I went to Antarctic Press, because suddenly I had issue page limitations, and before it was just like, oh, this chapter is 30 pages. Oh, this chapter is 23. It's just like I got to a point where it would just made sense to stop. And then suddenly I had to say, no, you have 20 to 24 pages max. And it's like, oh, okay. So I had to start, and it was a good thing because it forced me to economize my storytelling a little bit. But so again, it's one of those things I wish I could say, yes, I have the story all plotted out and scripted and blah 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 blah. It's like if I had to do all that, it'd never get done. So so far it's worked and people are enjoying it. So I'm going to keep doing it that way.
Yeah, whatever works. So, as someone who has been an artist for a project, as well as a writer and artist, do you have a preference?
I like writing and drawing my own things all together. I I mean, like when I work on GI Joe, I'll get a script, and fortunately, working on GI Joe is a little different because Larry Hama, the writer, he writes in the old kind of plot style where he only gives you enough information
Mm.
that you need, and if there's dialogue, it's the bare minimum, and then when he gets the art back, he'll finish the dialogue, and that's kind of nice. A lot of and that's why they used to make comics. A lot of modern comic artists don't like that because they don't like that much freedom. They want things broken down. Draw this, draw this, draw this, draw this. But I kind of like the freedom to do whatever I want to do, and maybe that's a little bit of the writer part of me too. But all things being equal, I would rather do my own stories and have the full control of whatever I want, which is the nice thing about crowdfunding and Webtoon.
Definitely. I know you mentioned kind of starting to work on the project just at a convention, but what was the inspiration for the idea?
Well, I had the name at first, and I was trying to find a story for it because like, oh, that'd be a good name for a story. And I had a couple different versions of things, and nothing really like clicked. And then I was at the this convention, and the very first image I ever drew of it was what ended up being the cover with William standing there looking at the city. It's the cover to issue 1, and I drew that page, and then I went back and at the convention, and I started the page that was before it, where he's climbing the thing, and then it just kind of it started out as an experiment, and I just started basically didn't know where it was going, and pretty quickly as I was writing what ended up being the first issue, things just kind of clicked together, and I was like, okay, this is what's going on. This is the story and stuff. So it was very organic and again like kind of being playing in a sandbox at the beginning, and it still is a little bit, which is why I think that it's hard to tell exactly how many pages is left. Well, I'm not exactly sure because I didn't start it that way. So that's the best answer I can give.
Yeah, it's funny because with both William the Last and Gunship Thunderpunch, you have this sense of fun and adventure, but I think they both have a lot of heart as well. Do you ever write with a certain storytelling intention or certain themes in mind?
Um, well, I mean, how I write is usually, structure wise, it's basically a 3 act structure. You have a character, you get him in trouble, you get him out. But as far as themes, family is important, and growth of a character, and redemption, having a moral failing, and then trying to rectify that, and things like that. Just big human themes are important to me. So, because I think those are regardless of who you are, the big common human themes resonate. I mean, this is why people like, this is why we like Star Wars, and why we like, Jaws and things. It's like these are big concepts. So those typically how I write, but I don't write like heavy-handed. Still try to keep it light entertainment. I want to make people resonate with it emotionally, and but also just be along for a good ride.
Definitely. I find that there's this kind of pretentious misconception that if something is entertaining, it's less
Yeah,
artful. And I disagree.
yeah, yeah. I do too. It's there's not either or. So, and I think too, people and everybody knows immediately when they're being preached at, and when you are aware of, here comes the message like an arrow, and it hit me. It's like, oh, okay, you've broken the story a bit. It's like you took me out of the story. Now I'm aware of this message, as opposed to it having a fun story around these very universal kind of things that everybody shares. So that's kind of from my philosophy of storytelling is, for what I do, right? I'm light entertainment. So it's like, okay, how can I make this meaningful, but in a way that is, you don't feel like you've been beat over the head with anything when you leave, right? Maybe we've touched on some things here and there, but overall you should leave feeling like you really enjoyed this ride that you were just on.
Exactly. Both in design and in dialogue, I think all of your characters are very distinct and well well written. I
Oh, thanks.
especially love Ella. I think she's like a little
Oh,
spitfire.
she's fun.
This might be a difficult question to answer, but what do you think makes for a good character?
Well, definitely having a specific attitude. Like I typically write when I'm writing for myself. A lot of times I don't really write descriptions. I just write the dialogue. Like I can see, since I'm not writing for someone else, I know what's happening. I may make a note here and there, but I'm really kind of dialogue and not dialogue heavy. Like I don't like comic books that are very heavily wordy. But I do like natural sounding dialogue. So I think it's important to say, who is this character? What is their personality? Do they have a certain way that they say things? And it's kind of hard to tell someone, all right, when you write to get that, do this. It's like, it's almost something through listening to people and thinking to yourself how they would say this. And some people, there's I don't do this myself, but I think it's a good um, tip is read it out loud, and if it sounds clunky, it's clunky. Like if this
Mm.
sounds like something a human being would not say in this way, then you need to change it. So a lot of my characters, I knew the kinds of thing Ella would say to William, and I know the kind of, she's a little bit sassy and sarcastic. She's not overly arrogant. She's just very bold, and she'll tell you exactly she's kind of like my grandmother. And it does help, like if you have someone in your life, like he or she's that type of person, right? Um, so it helps to spend a little time just getting in the head and the soul of the character, so you can say what types of things would they say, and wouldn't they say, what would sound wrong coming from this person.
Yes, I think saying things out loud is such a good tip. I think the same is true of acting things out when you're trying to figure out how something's
Mhm.
going to look as well.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely. I think some writers and some, especially I think some artists who move into writing, kind of the learning curve of writing, run into this where they have something they want to say, and it's like they start putting on their literary hat, and they start thinking it has to be. No, I need to write, and it's like, no, no, you need to talk. You need this is dialogue. This is an actual human being saying things to actual other human beings, and unless you're you know drawing Lord of the Rings or something, then it needs to sound casual, essentially. Um, Otherwise, it comes out stiff, and the reader. And it's like it's the writer sometimes, because the mood and what you may not pick up on it, but just the straight up reader will immediately feel clunky dialogue. Even if they read it in their head, they will know. Everybody's done it, right? Everybody picks up that thing and reads and goes, no human being would say this to another human being unless they were a robot.
Right. I think that's what I love about your story so much is that when I'm reading it, I always have these thoughts of like, oh, that's such an Ella thing to say. That's such a William thing to say. And it's like you were saying about basing characters off of people you might know in real life. I think that it's inevitable that our voice will come into story, but you
Hmm.
want to be sure that not everybody has your voice.
Right. You don't want the big, the big nasty killer to have your voice necessarily.
Right.
But you want it to be the big nasty killer say the type of things a big nasty killer would actually say. Not a big nasty comic book killer, maybe. It's kind of base. There's definitely the types of things that every writer kind of will say things a certain way, and people that know them, I think, can pick up on. Oh, that sounds like you. That's not, or not.
Mm.
Not maybe if not you, it sounds like the kind of thing that if you were Ella, you would say.
Yeah, I agree. I think we all, and I think that speaks to just artists needing to get out more and listen to people
Yeah.
too. Yeah. And then as far as the visual aspect, I think your style is obviously very professional and fun. Do you have any major influences?
Um, my influences are kind of all over the map. I looked at, like, when I was coming up, I looked at a lot of artists. I just went from like book to book, and I was like, I like this drawing. I like this drawing. Not really paying attention to names. And it wasn't until I got much older that I started, realizing, oh, I like this thing and this person and that person. One of the artists that I really liked in the 90s and early 2000s was Michael Ringo. He passed away in 2007. He actually lived close to here, but he was worked on
Mm.
Fantastic Four and Spider Man, and he had a very cartoony, fun style. I like a lot of some of the older artists like Alex Toth, who designed. I mean, he did so much stuff, but he among his comic book work, in addition to that, he also designed like the old Super Friends cartoons and all the 60s and 70s, like Hanna Barbera stuff is his design. And
Mm.
he was always looking how to convey things as simply as possible but still work, and I really like that. And then there are artists that I like that I could never be as good as, and I don't even try to draw in their style, like old, like 20th century magazine illustration and the golden age of illustration stuff. I find really really inspiring, even though I couldn't draw like that. But so that's kind of the thing that in my case that I kind of cherry pick. I'm like, I never really coming up really was like, oh, this person is amazing. It was more like, that drawing is really cool, for better or for worse. So and there are artists that, looking back to, like Jose Garcia Lopez, who did all the. If you've ever seen, everybody in who's familiar with the DC Comics characters from the early '80s, he did the model sheets. So every time you see that stuff, it's basically him. His stuff showed up on all over the place. Again, I didn't know his name at the time until I was an adult, and I was like, oh, that guy. I love that guy, apparently. So that in my case, that's kind of how my inspirations go.
I like that idea of taking inspiration from art more than artist. That
Yeah.
makes sense. And your work is definitely unique, so I hope this comes off as a compliment, but I definitely get a little bit of like Jeff Smith vibes as well. So
Oh, yeah. I've heard that. People have told me that before too.
maybe it's just the fantasy genre, but yeah, I think it adds to it. As someone who is trying to do a lot of different projects and working across different platforms, do you have any time management tips?
I wish I had better ones. I mean, I have an 8-year-old son, so my biggest tip is go with the flow. I try to stick to a schedule as much as I can. Um, I like, again, with live stream. I know at 10 o'clock or so, I'm going to try to do that every day. Um, Setting a deadline, and I need to be better about this, but like a personal project deadline is good. But honestly, the biggest, I don't know about time management, because again, I'm one of those people that, when if you sat me down, and I've tried it before, like I've gotten apps and I've read the books, and I'm like, all right, do this and set this, and it's like, it feels like one more thing to do itself, right? It's like, now I got to make a list of, and I got to go to this thing and do it, and I just shut down. I just try to, like, I do keep a whiteboard, and I have everything things I need to do, and so I'm not forgetting about it. But I try to like do something, even if it's a little, even if it's only like I can work on something for 15 minutes. Like, okay, I got this project, I need to get this done. Okay, well, maybe on this drawing, all I can do is just really sketch in the layout real quick and then set it aside till tomorrow because I've got this video project I need to do or whatever. So just not letting things go, ideally more than a couple days before you've had your hand on it again, will go a long way to before you know it, a month goes by and you've gotten actually quite a bit done. So that for me, that's kind of the thing that I kind of go to. I wish I had a better answer, but it's one of those it's one of those maybe personality flaws, but sometimes you just have to work around work around them.
No, that's a good answer, especially on top of being a family man. I'm sure it's hard to balance everything.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's in with summertime, and he's around all the time pretty much. It's like, hey, all of a sudden, I have to drop everything and take my son to the pool with his friends, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess we're doing that now. So just gotta, yeah, go with the flow. Don't hold loosely to your plans.
Right. And related to that, I assume that you work from like an at-home studio.
Yeah, yeah. I've got I guess it would have been a den off our house. So I've got a little room. I can close the door and block everybody out if I need to. But I got my space here. I've been fortunate enough. My wife and I have lived in three different places, and the thing was like I always get a room. I just need one room. So it started with a bedroom in our first little place, and our second house I had basically what was a would have been a one car garage, and then our house now it's a little bit smaller, but I've actually found the smaller place makes me work more efficiently, honestly, because I can't wander around as much. But so yeah, I'm able to work at home and get all my stuff here, and I can kind of shut the world out if I need to.
Right. Do you think that having that physical space that is designated for your art kind of helps maintain that work-life balance?
Yeah, it does. Because I mean, I spend a lot of time here. I think I probably spend 90% of my time here in this little room, and that's good and bad. I don't mind that. I'm just kind of naturally the way I am. But if I need to get away, all I got to do is go in the living room, like, and I feel like I'm not working as soon as I go in there. So, I mean, I have a Surface Pro, so if I want to be my lazy work, I can sit on the couch and watch TV and still kind of lay things out a bit. And I'm actually working, but it feels like I feel like I'm not. But it is nice to have the place mentally where you can physically go, and then this is your little world, and you can get things done. And I used to have studio space, like I mentioned, with those guys downtown. But and it's like you go through seasons in life, and at that time, I really did need to be around stuff. But by the end of those 5 years, I realized I really needed to be alone, especially if you're doing writing, because I cannot. I have to have silence. I can't have, or if I'm out, it can be ambient noise, or if I'm in a restaurant or somewhere, that's fine. But people talking to me, you're writing and somebody's, hey, look at this, or they're joking around. It's like I can't do that. So me having my own little space, my little world here alone is a good thing.
Yeah, I think writing definitely takes a certain amount of
Yeah.
concentration. That's fair. Speaking of, what kind of projects can we expect from you in the future?
Well, again, it's Wayne is ongoing, and Thunder Punch Book 2 and 3 coming up, along with the collected edition. After that, I may continue with a different Thunder Punch thing, depending on the momentum with that. I'm working up some different. Will probably have I know I will have at some point a new art book somewhere in that little process, as well as building up the YouTube channel and doing more tutorials, and then just video projects, and just experimenting with storytelling with little videos and stuff. But again, those are my side projects. So for the near foreseeable future, that's pretty much what I've got on the horizon.
That makes me think too about how you kind of had this sandbox approach to William the Last, and you're thinking about other stories you could tell within the Gunship universe. Do you have any advice for world building and how to avoid like being too expository in your storytelling?
Oh, my philosophy is, and this I did this with Thunder Punch, and every writer wants to write, right? They want to do build up this world and stuff, but as in comic books, I I just want to tell you enough that you need to know to tell this story. So, like with Thunder Punch, I tell you everything you need to know from the backstory in basically 2 pages. It's essentially we looked for. I mean, this isn't the dialogue, but it's essentially we looked we spent years surveying the surface of Mars. Uh, when we finally found life, it was the greatest, achievement of the last 1,000 years. Next page, big splash page. Martians are destroying the city. It just says Mars wasn't thrilled. That's all you need to know. We're at war, right? End of story.
Right. Yeah.
Then we zoom in on the characters and you're off on the adventure. So I really and you learn things as you go. You should learn more about the world they're living in the dialogue, but again, conversationally, in a way that's not a monologue. Uh, it should be people talking about things. That's kind of my philosophy, because I think once you get into the extended kind of over wordy explanations, it loses the fun and breaks up the flow of the story. So that again, that's my personal comic book. I mean, in fiction, that's a different thing, in actual novels and things. But comics is a very delicate medium, and I don't know what the ratio of words to art is, but there's a point where it breaks, and it needs to lean a little more heavily on the visual than the word.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Do you have a favorite genre to work in?
Um, Sci-fi fantasy is usually where I hang out. Whether it's a fantasy thing like William Last, or uh, giant robots, the kind of thing I'm doing now. But anything where I can introduce some sort of fantasy element or science, something fun to draw, monsters or anything like that. I don't um, just a straight up. I wouldn't enjoy drawing a horror story. I'm not a big horror fan, first of all, so I know I wouldn't enjoy it. But just straight up like a history thing or something. Even though I love history, I wouldn't want to draw it. So again, anything that gives me an opportunity to draw fanciful things is I'm all in.
Definitely. I think genre gives us that opportunity to explore what we enjoy drawing.
Hmm. Yep.
Well, again, I appreciate your time so much. I don't want to keep you for too long, but I would love to kind of just wrap up here and ask if you have any advice for aspiring comic book artists.
Yeah, I mean, the two main things. Well, the one big thing is just finish projects, even if they're little.
Mm.
Don't worry about failing, because you're going to. Everybody does. Just keep pushing forward and uh, just finish it. Don't fall into the trap of trying to make everything perfect. Study your craft. Try to get better at each component, and on top of that, just build your audience. And it's a slow process, and so it's like if it feels like it's taking forever, that's normal.
That's definitely good to know. So thank you. And thank you for all your thoughts. I really appreciate being able to talk to you today.
Oh yeah, thanks for asking me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you again to Brian for joining me on the podcast, and thank you for listening. If you are so inclined, please like, comment, subscribe, and definitely check out Brian's channel as well. I will have all of his social media and projects linked below. And if you are at all curious about what I'm doing, I have a webcomic as well called Soul Match on Webtoon, and that is linked below too. To be honest, I never fail to be surprised when someone just agrees to talk to me, so I am especially pleased that I've got quite a lineup coming up for y'all, but still, please do leave your recommendations. If there is someone that you would love to hear from, I would love to check out their work and see if I can get them on the podcast for you as well. And I've said it before, but I'll say it again. If you are a webcomic creator too, let me know. I mean it. Tell me the title. I want to read your stuff. All right, y'all, take care, and I will see you next Monday.